If you are enjoying this video, smash that like button, subscribe, and hit the bell. Share it with your friends, and let me know in the comments where you are watching from. Every like and subscribe helps the channel grow. My name is James Cooper, and this happened to me back in 1985 when I was working as a cave rescue specialist at Mammoth Cave National Park in Kentucky. I never thought I'd share this story, but I can't keep it buried anymore. The nightmares won't let me. I remember that summer like it was yesterday. The air was thick and heavy, and the storms wouldn't stop. We'd had more rain in 2 weeks than we usually got in 3 months. But that wasn't what worried me. It was the strange vibrations coming from deep within the cave system, vibrations that made my skin crawl and my old leg injury throb. You see, before all this happened, I'd already seen my share of cave horrors. 3 years earlier, I lost my best friend Mike in a mine collapse in Colorado. We were trying to save a trapped family when the whole thing came down. I made it out, but Mike, well, after that, small spaces started to terrify me. Funny job for someone with claustrophobia, right? But I couldn't quit. Something about the caves kept pulling me back. I developed what the other rangers called a cave sense after that incident. I could somehow feel when something wasn't right underground. Maybe it was the way the air moved, or how the rocks sounded when you tapped them. I can't really explain it. But it had saved lives more than once. That summer, my cave sense was screaming at me. The new passages that had opened up after the small earthquakes felt wrong. The local Native American elders had been visiting more often, leaving offerings at the cave entrances. When I asked them why, they just shook their heads and muttered about the people below and how the barriers were thinning. I didn't pay much attention to those warnings, not until the college group went missing. It was supposed to be a routine spelunking expedition. 6 students and their professor from the University of Kentucky. They were well-equipped, well-trained, and knew these caves better than most. But their last radio transmission, I still get chills thinking about it. "Cooper, there's something down here with us. We can hear them. Singing. The walls are moving. Oh God, the lights. They're everywhere. Then static. Just static. And this deep, low rumble that seemed to come from the very heart of the earth. That was when I knew. Whatever I'd been feeling, whatever my cave sense had been warning me about, it was real, and those kids were down there with it. I had no idea then that this rescue mission would uncover secrets that should have stayed buried, or that what we'd find down there would change everything I thought I knew about our world. But that's how it started, with some rain, some earthquakes, and a group of missing students who heard singing in the deep. The next morning, I gathered my rescue team. I'd worked with them before, but something felt different this time. Sarah Chen, our cave biologist, was checking her sample bags. Tom Martinez, who knew these caves like the back of his hand, kept looking at his map with worried eyes. Emily Watson, our rock expert, was testing her equipment, and Mark Phillips, our medic, was double-checking his supplies. "Something's not right down there," I told them as we geared up at the cave entrance. "My leg's been aching all night, and I haven't felt anything like this since Colorado." The cave mouth seemed darker than usual that morning. Our flashlights didn't reach as far as they should have. The air coming from inside was cold, too cold for summer, and there was this smell, like wet earth mixed with something else, something I couldn't name. We started our descent at 8 a.m. The first hour was normal, just the usual tight squeezes and careful climbing. But then we reached the new passages that had opened up after the earthquakes. That's when things started getting weird. "James," Sarah called out, her voice shaking a bit. "Look at this." She was pointing her light at the cave wall. There was some kind of fungus growing there, but it wasn't like anything I'd seen before. It gave off a faint bluish glow, even when we turned our lights away. Tom walked up to touch it, but I grabbed his arm. "Don't," I said. "Something about it feels wrong." We kept going deeper. Our radio started acting up. Just static and strange echoes. The deeper we went, the worse it got. The temperature kept dropping and the air felt heavy, like it was pushing against us. Then we found the first sign of the student group, a backpack caught on a rock. It was torn, like something had ripped it, not like it had just gotten snagged. Inside was a journal belonging to one of the students. The last entry made my blood run cold. Day 3. The singing is getting louder. Professor Williams says we should turn back, but we can't find our way. The passages keep changing. And those drawings on the walls, they weren't here before. They're watching us. I can feel them watching. Emily picked up some strange readings on her equipment. "These readings, they don't make sense," she whispered. "It's like the cave is, breathing." That's when we heard it, a sound that still haunts my dreams. It wasn't quite singing, wasn't quite humming, but something in between. It seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. And underneath it all was that deep rumble I'd heard on the radio. Mark, who'd been quiet this whole time, suddenly grabbed my arm. "Cooper," he said, pointing his light ahead, "tell me you see that." In the darkness ahead, something moved. Something that shouldn't have been there. Something that made my cave sense scream louder than it ever had before. And that was just the beginning of our nightmare. What we saw in that moment made us all freeze. About 50 feet ahead, there was movement, like shadows dancing. But there wasn't anything there to cast them. Our flashlights caught glimpses of something pale and quick, ducking behind rocks. "Everyone, stay close," I whispered, though I'm not sure why I was whispering. The cave seemed to swallow our voices anyway. We followed the student group's trail deeper into the cave. The path led us to a chamber we'd never seen before. It was huge, bigger than a football field, and the ceiling was covered in those glowing blue fungi. But that wasn't what made us gasp. On the walls were paintings, hundreds of them, not just old Native American drawings, but fresh ones too. They seemed to tell a story about creatures that lived deep underground. And some of the paint, it looked wet, like it had been done recently. "Cooper." Sarah's voice trembled. "These markings, they're new. And look at the floor." Our lights showed fresh footprints in the mud, but they weren't human. They were longer, with too many toes, and they seemed to come from all directions. That's when Mark noticed something else. "Guys, is it just me, or is the water rising?" He was right. The small stream that ran through the chamber was getting bigger, faster than it should. And the water, it had a reddish tint to it. Suddenly, Tom's radio crackled to life. Through the static, we heard a voice, one of the students. "Help, we're in the deep chamber. They've taken Professor Williams, please. The water's rising. They're coming back." Emily checked her map. "There's a lower chamber about half a mile ahead. But with these water levels," I made a quick decision. "We have to try. Everyone check your gear. We're going down." As we moved toward the passage that would take us deeper, I noticed something odd about my experimental sonar equipment. It kept picking up movement all around us, like we were surrounded by things hiding just out of sight. The singing got louder as we descended. It wasn't just in our ears anymore, we could feel it in our bones, and with each step, my old leg injury throbbed worse than ever. Then Tom, who was leading the way, stopped suddenly. "Oh my God," he said. We'd found the entrance to what looked like a city, an ancient city carved right into the cave walls, and in the dim light of our flashlights, we saw them, dozens of pairs of eyes reflecting back at us. Eyes that shouldn't have been there. Eyes that shouldn't have existed. That's when we realized we weren't on a rescue mission anymore. We were being hunted. Everything happened so fast after that. Those eyes, they belonged to something that looked almost human, but not quite. Their skin was pale as milk, and they moved like water in the dark. They didn't need flashlights. They could see perfectly in the blackness. "Run!" I shouted, but there was nowhere to run. The water was rising faster now, already up to our knees. Sarah screamed. One of them had grabbed her sample bag, pulling her backward. Tom rushed to help her, swinging his gear bag like a weapon. The creature let go, melting back into the shadows with a hiss that sounded almost like laughter. "This way." Emily pointed to a narrow passage. We splashed through the rising water, our lights bouncing off the wet walls. Behind us, we could hear them moving, following us, their feet making no sound in the water. That's when we heard the students calling for help. Their voices were coming from a chamber to our left. We found 3 of them huddled on a high rock ledge, the water rising below them. But something was wrong with their eyes. They just stared straight ahead, like they were in a trance. "Where are the others?" I asked, helping them down. They took them," one student whispered. "To the breeding chambers. Professor Williams went first. They need us. New blood, they said. Been down here too long." Mark checked them quickly. "They're in shock, Cooper. We need to get them out now." But the creatures had other plans. They started emerging from the water itself, their long fingers reaching for us. In the glow of the fungi, I could see their faces clearly now. No eyes, just smooth skin where eyes should be. Yet somehow, I knew they could see us perfectly. My leg was screaming with pain, warning me of danger from every direction. The water was chest high now, and our lights were starting to fail. Emily's equipment was going crazy, beeping warnings about the cave's structure. "The tunnels are collapsing," she yelled over the rush of water. "The whole system is becoming unstable." I made a decision then. In my pack, I had some explosives. We sometimes used them to clear blocked passages. If we couldn't escape, maybe we could seal them in. "Everyone, get to higher ground," I ordered. "And cover your ears." I pulled out the charges, but one of them grabbed my leg, pulling me under. In the struggle, I felt something tear, my leg, the same one that had been injured before. The pain was blinding, but somehow, I managed to set the charges. The last thing I remember was hitting the detonator as the water swept us toward what we hoped was an exit passage. The explosion was deafening, even underwater. The whole cave seemed to scream. The explosion shook the entire cave system. Rocks crashed down everywhere, and the water pushed us through the tunnels like we were in some crazy water slide. I couldn't tell which way was up or down anymore. My leg was useless now, torn up pretty badly in that creature's grip. Through the chaos, I could hear Sarah screaming my name, and Tom yelling something about a side passage. The water carried us into a natural tunnel that sloped upward. We dragged ourselves and the 3 students through, coughing and gasping. Mark immediately started treating my leg, but we all knew it would never be the same again. "Wait, where's Emily?" Sarah suddenly asked. The silence that followed was awful. She hadn't made it through with us. Neither had the other 3 students or Professor Williams. They were still down there, with them. We could hear the creatures shrieking behind the cave-in, a sound that mixed with the rushing water and falling rocks. But they couldn't reach us anymore. The explosion had sealed off their main chamber. It took us 6 hours to find our way back to the surface. By then, government vehicles were everywhere. Men in dark suits took the 3 students away before they could talk to anyone. They made us sign papers, threatened us if we ever told anyone what we saw. "This never happened," they said. "There was a cave-in, that's all." But they didn't know about my sonar readings. Before everything went crazy, my equipment had mapped part of their city. And it showed something terrifying, tunnels, hundreds of them, spreading out like a spider web under the whole country. Now, years later, I still work at Mammoth Cave. My bad leg keeps me from going too deep, but maybe that's for the best. Sometimes late at night I turn on my sonar equipment and check the readings. And every time I see them, movements in the deep, getting closer to the surface. The students we saved, they never spoke about what happened down there. They couldn't, or wouldn't. But sometimes they come back to the cave, just to stand at the entrance. They stare into the darkness with those strange, empty eyes, like they're listening to something. And on really quiet nights, if you stand near the sealed passage, you can still hear it. That faint, haunting singing, calling from deep below, calling for new blood. The government might have covered it up, but I know the truth. They're still down there, waiting. And someday, they'll find another way out. Just last week, my sonar picked up movement under a cave system in New Mexico. I've tried warning people, but who's going to believe a limping old cave ranger? All I can do now is tell my story and hope someone listens, because the next time they come up, they won't stay hidden. They're getting hungry again. You know what's really strange? Last month, I got a letter from Sarah. She's been studying those fungi samples she managed to save from the cave. She said they're like nothing anyone's ever seen before. They don't just glow, they seem to communicate with each other, like they're all connected somehow. And Tom? He quit his job at the park right after what happened. But 2 weeks ago, he called me in the middle of the night, his voice shaking. He said he'd been having these dreams about the city under the cave. In them, he could see more chambers we never found, filled with strange machines that looked both ancient and advanced at the same time. The 3 students we saved haven't been doing well. I keep tabs on them through a nurse I know. They don't sleep much anymore. During full moons, they all get really agitated, like they can hear something the rest of us can't. One of them started drawing pictures, hundreds of them. They show more of those creatures, but also maps of tunnel systems under major cities. My leg still aches every day, but it's worst when I'm near cave entrances. It's like it remembers what grabbed me, and it's warning me to stay away. But I can't. I have to keep watching, keep monitoring. Last week, there was another small earthquake near the cave. The Park Service said it was normal, but I know better. My sonar readings showed movement again, but this time it was different. They're digging new tunnels, moving in new directions. They're looking for another way out. I've started keeping a diary of everything I remember from down there. The way they moved, the strange symbols on their city walls, the weird machines we glimpsed. Sometimes I wake up remembering new details, like how their skin seemed to ripple when they moved, or how the air around them felt electric. The government men still watch me. I see their black cars parked near my house sometimes. They know I'm keeping track of something, but they can't figure out what. My sonar equipment looks normal from the outside. They don't know I've modified it to track the movements deep underground. Yesterday, I got a call from a cave researcher in New Mexico. She said they've found something in one of their deep caves, drawings that match the ones we saw in Mammoth Cave, and that same red-tinted water. I warned her to stay away, but will she listen? We never do we? We always have to look deeper, even when we know we shouldn't. I keep thinking about what those creatures said to the students, about needing new blood. What if that wasn't just about breeding? What if they're planning something bigger? All I know is that my cave sense is screaming louder than ever. Something's coming. I just hope next time we're ready for them. Because they're still down there, waiting in the dark. And they're getting stronger. Just this morning, something happened that I have to share. I was checking my sonar readings like I do every day, when I noticed a pattern I've never seen before. The movements underground, they're not random anymore. They're coordinated, like they're all moving towards something. I tried calling Emily's old office at the university. The new geologist there said they've been picking up strange vibrations all across the country. Not earthquakes exactly, but something else. Something that moves. One of the students we saved, Michael, showed up at my door yesterday. He looked terrible, like he hadn't slept in weeks. His hands were shaking as he showed me his notebook. Pages and pages of those same symbols we saw in the underground city. He said he draws them in his sleep now. They're building something, he whispered. Something big. I can feel it in my head, like they're all working together, and they want us to know. I asked him what he meant, but he just kept drawing. The symbols showed what looked like a map, not of caves, but of something bigger. Something that spreads under every major city in the country. This morning, my phone rang at 4 a.m. It was Tom. He was at another cave entrance in Tennessee. "Cooper," he said, his voice shaking. "The water here, it's turning red, just like before. And the singing, can you hear it?" I could. Even through the phone, I could hear that familiar humming. The same one that haunted us in Mammoth Cave. The government men are getting nervous, too. I can tell by how many more of them are watching me now. They've started setting up equipment near cave entrances all over the country. They know something's coming, but they don't know what to do about it. Sarah sent me a sample of that fungi yesterday. It's still glowing, but now it pulses, like a heartbeat. And when I put it near my sonar equipment, the readings go crazy. My leg is hurting worse than ever. It's like it knows something bad is about to happen. That old cave sense of mine is screaming at me to warn people, but who would believe me? All I can do is keep watching, keep recording, and hope we figure out what they're planning before it's too late. Because one thing's for sure, what we found in Mammoth Cave wasn't just a colony of creatures. It was the beginning of something much bigger. And I think we're about to find out what that is. This morning's readings changed everything. At exactly 3:17 a.m., my sonar equipment started beeping like crazy. The screen showed movement everywhere, not just under Mammoth Cave, but in a pattern that spread out like a giant web across the country. I called Tom right away. Before I could even speak, he said, "You're seeing it too, aren't you?" All three of the students we saved called me within minutes of each other. They were all saying the same thing. They're waking up. I drove to the cave entrance, my leg aching worse than ever. The government men were already there, setting up more equipment. But something was different this time. They looked scared. The park ranger on duty, a young guy named Mike, came running up to my truck. "Mr. Cooper, the water level in the main cave. It's dropping. Just disappeared, like someone pulled a giant plug. And the temperature readings? They're going crazy." I checked my portable sonar. The movements were getting stronger, more organized. It reminded me of ants when you disturb their nest, all moving with a purpose, following some kind of plan. Then my phone buzzed. It was a text from Sarah. The fungi samples. They're all pulsing at the same time now. All of them. Even the ones from different caves. Something's coordinating them. That's when we heard it. Not just at Mammoth Cave, but reports started coming in from caves all over. That same haunting singing we heard years ago. But this time it was louder, clearer. Like they want us to hear it. The three students showed up at the cave entrance an hour ago. Their eyes were wide, and they kept staring at the ground like they could see through it. Michael, the one who'd been drawing the symbols, looked at me and said something that made my blood run cold. "They're not just coming up, Mr. Cooper. They're coming for us. All of us. And this time, they're bringing their city with them." I'm writing this from my observation post near the cave entrance. The government men are too busy with their equipment to notice me anymore. My sonar screen shows the movement getting closer to the surface, and my leg feels like it's on fire. Something big is about to happen. I can feel it, and this time, dynamite won't be enough to stop it. The sonar screen is showing something I've never seen before. The movements are forming perfect circles under major cities, like ripples in a pond. But these ripples are moving inward, not outward, like everything's being pulled toward the center. Just now, my phone lit up with messages. Tom, the cave walls are vibrating in Tennessee. Sarah, all the fungi samples just turned bright red. Mark, hospital equipment is going haywire. The three students are sitting in a circle near the cave entrance, holding hands and mumbling something that sounds like the creature's language. When I tried to get close, Michael looked up at me with tears in his eyes. "They're opening the gates," he whispered. "All of them, at once." The government men are panicking now. Their equipment is picking up what looks like huge underground spaces where there shouldn't be any. Cities under cities, and they're all connecting. My leg feels like it's being crushed again, just like that day in the deep. Through the pain, I can almost understand what the students are saying. Something about the rising and the return. 5 minutes ago, all the birds suddenly flew away from the cave area. The air feels heavy, like before a big storm. But the sky is clear. The pressure is coming from below. The sonar screen just showed something new, a massive movement heading toward the surface. Not just here, but everywhere, all at once. And now I can hear that singing again. But this time, it's not just coming from the cave. It's coming from under every city in America. They're not hiding anymore. They're coming up. And we can't stop them this time. I have to go now. The ground is starting to shake. But remember this: if you ever hear that singing, run. Run as far from any cave or tunnel as you can. Because what we found in Mammoth Cave that day, it was just the beginning. And the end? The end is starting right now. The recording ends here, with the sound of rumbling earth, and that haunting, otherworldly singing growing louder. Asterisk. 3 days later, final recording. This will be my last message. Everything's changed since that day at the cave. The government's calling it a series of natural disasters, but we know better. The creatures. They didn't attack like we thought they would. No, they were smarter than that. They're still underground, but they're not hiding anymore. Cities all over the country are reporting strange sounds from their subway systems. Water systems are showing traces of that red tint. And people. People are starting to change. The 3 students disappeared yesterday. So did Tom and Sarah. My sonar equipment shows the underground cities are growing, spreading like a cancer beneath our feet. The fungi we found? It's everywhere now. Growing in dark corners and basements and tunnels, always pulsing, always glowing, always spreading. My leg doesn't hurt anymore. In fact, it feels stronger than ever. And sometimes, when it's quiet, I can hear them singing, and part of me wants to sing back. If you're listening to this, stay away from the dark places, stay in the light. And if you ever hear that singing, if you ever feel drawn to caves or tunnels, remember my story. Because they're patient. They've waited thousands of years. And now they don't need to hunt us. We're coming to them, willingly. Static. End of recording. My name is Frank Harrison, and this happened to me back in 1963 when I was working as a park ranger at Mesa Verde National Park in Colorado. I still get chills thinking about those 3 horrible months, but I need to tell this story. Maybe writing it down will help me make sense of what happened there. I was 35 then, still trying to get my life back together after losing Sarah, my wife, to cancer the year before. The job at Mesa Verde seemed perfect, quiet, peaceful, away from people. Just me, the ancient cliff dwellings, and the vast Colorado sky. Or so I thought. You see, I wasn't just any ranger. I had served as a Marine sniper in Korea, and my grandmother was a Native American who filled my childhood with stories about skinwalkers and other creatures that lurk in the shadows. Back then, I thought they were just stories to keep kids from wandering off alone at night. How wrong I was. That summer was the driest anyone could remember. The usually green mesa had turned brown, and the streams were nothing but cracked mud. Even the animals were acting strange. The usual chattering of birds and rustling of small animals had gone quiet. It was like the whole park was holding its breath, waiting for something. I remember the day it all started, the 15th of June, under a blood-red harvest moon that seemed too big and too close. I was doing my evening patrol when I found the first bodies. What I saw that night changed everything I thought I knew about our world. But let me start from the beginning. From the day the ancient land of Mesa Verde decided to show me its darkest secrets. I had been working at Mesa Verde for about 6 months when things started getting weird. Every evening I'd walk the trails, check on tourists, and make sure everyone was safe. The ancient cliff dwellings always looked spooky at sunset, with shadows creeping up their walls like dark fingers. But that June, something felt different. The first strange thing I noticed was the silence. Usually, you'd hear coyotes howling, owls hooting, and little creatures scurrying around. But now, nothing. Even the tourists noticed it. "Hey, Ranger Frank," they'd say, "where are all the animals?" I didn't have an answer. The drought wasn't helping either. The ground was so dry it cracked like broken pottery, and the usually green trees looked sad and brown. My throat felt scratchy every time I breathed the dusty air. One evening, while checking the ancient petroglyphs, those are rock drawings made by the people who lived here long ago, I found something that made my skin crawl. There were new drawings on the wall, fresh ones. They showed twisted figures, half human and half animal, but these weren't made by tourists. The images were carved deep into the rock, and they seemed to have appeared overnight. I radioed back to headquarters about it, but they just told me to write it up in my report. Probably some kids with too much time on their hands, my boss said, but I knew better. I remembered my grandmother's stories about shapeshifters and dark spirits. She always said, "When the land goes quiet, the old ones are watching." That night, I couldn't sleep. The harvest moon hung in the sky like a giant red eye, and the wind carried whispers I couldn't quite understand. I checked my old medicine pouch, the one grandmother gave me before she died, and loaded my gun with the special silver bullets I kept locked away. Something in my gut told me I was going to need them. Little did I know, this was just the beginning. The real horror was still to come, and it would start with 3 missing hikers who were about to be found in a way that would haunt my dreams forever. The next morning started like any other, until my radio crackled to life around 7 a.m. "Frank, we need you at Cliff Palace," said Tom, my fellow ranger. His voice sounded shaky, which wasn't like him at all. When I got there, I knew why. 3 backpacks were scattered near the cliff edge, their contents spilled everywhere. But that wasn't the scary part. The ground was covered in strange tracks, not human, not animal, but something in between. And the smell, like rotten eggs mixed with something worse. "Found them about an hour ago," Tom said, pointing to the backpacks. "They belong to those hikers who signed in 2 days ago. The Johnson family, Mom, Dad, and their teenage son. We followed the tracks, which led us to a small cave. What we found inside, well, I still have nightmares about it. The bodies were there, but they were wrong. It looked like something had turned them inside out, but somehow, their faces were perfectly fine, frozen in looks of pure terror. I'd seen some awful things in Korea, but nothing like this. The police came, of course. They took pictures and asked questions, but I could tell they were as confused as we were. They talked about animal attacks, maybe a bear gone crazy from the drought. But I'd seen bear attacks before, and this was different. That evening, something even stranger happened. While I was standing guard near the crime scene, I heard someone calling for help. It sounded exactly like Mrs. Johnson's voice. I recognized it from the video camera we found in their backpack, but that was impossible because she was, well, you know. I followed the voice, my hand on my gun. It led me deeper into the park, towards the old burial grounds. Then I heard it, a sound that made my blood freeze. It was like laughter and screaming mixed together, and it didn't sound human at all. When I turned around to head back, I saw the coyotes. 3 of them standing on their back legs like people, watching me with eyes that glowed red in the darkness. They weren't normal coyotes. Normal coyotes don't smile, and these were smiling at me. I ran. I'm not ashamed to admit it. 20 years of military and ranger experience. But those smiling coyotes sent me running like a scared kid. Back at my cabin, I called Tom on the radio, my hands still shaking. "Tom, you there? We need to talk about what's happening." But Tom's voice sounded different when he answered. "Everything's fine, Frank. Why don't you come over to my station? We can discuss it here." Something was off about the way he spoke. Too smooth, too perfect. I remembered my grandmother's warning. Skinwalkers can copy any voice, but they can't copy a soul. I didn't go to Tom's station that night. Instead, I pulled out my grandmother's old leather journal and started reading. The next morning, more tourists reported weird things. A little girl said she saw her mom in 2 places at once. An old man swore he watched a deer walking on 2 legs. And the new petroglyphs, they kept appearing every night, showing horrible things. I tried calling the tribal elders from the nearby reservation. Most wouldn't talk to me, but one old man, Joseph Running Bear, agreed to meet. We sat in my cabin as he looked through the pictures I'd taken. "The drought has weakened the old barriers," he said quietly. "Something ancient has woken up, something that's been trapped here since before the cliff dwellings were built. How do we stop it?" I asked. Joseph looked at me with sad eyes. "Your partner Tom, when did you last see him in daylight?" That's when it hit me. I hadn't seen Tom during the day for almost a week. He'd only been working night shifts, and always alone. Just then, my radio crackled. "Frank?" It was Tom's voice again. "There's a group of tourists trapped in Balcony House. I need backup." Joseph grabbed my arm. "Don't go. That's not your friend anymore." But I knew I had to. Real or not, if there were tourists in danger, I had to help. I grabbed my gun with the silver bullets, my grandmother's medicine pouch, and headed out into the darkening evening. The sun was setting, painting the cliffs blood red, and somewhere in the distance, I heard those coyotes laughing again. Balcony House was one of our most dangerous cliff dwellings, 30 feet up the canyon wall with only a tall ladder to reach it. As I climbed up, my flashlight beam bouncing off the ancient walls, I heard voices above. Tourists, for sure. 6 of them, by the sound of it. "Hello? This is Ranger Harrison," I called out. "Help us, please," a woman's voice cried back. But then I heard Tom's laugh, except it wasn't really a laugh anymore. It sounded like rocks grinding together. When I reached the top, I saw them. A family of 4 and an elderly couple, huddled in the corner of the ancient room. And there was Tom, standing between me and them. But he didn't look right. His ranger uniform was perfect, too perfect, like it was painted on. And his face. It seemed to shift when I wasn't looking directly at it. "Frank, old buddy," Tom said, smiling too wide, "glad you could join our little party." I raised my gun. "That's close enough. Let them go, whatever you are." Tom's head tilted at an impossible angle. "Whatever I am, Frank, you're hurting my feelings." As he spoke, his skin started to ripple like water. The tourist screamed. I fired my first silver bullet. It hit Tom in the chest, but instead of blood, black smoke poured out. His body began to change, growing taller, darker, his fingers stretching into claws. "Run!" I shouted to the tourists. "Down the ladder now!" What happened next was like a nightmare coming true. Tom's body split open like a rotten fruit, and something crawled out, something with too many legs and eyes that glowed like hot coals. The air filled with that rotten egg smell again. The tourists scrambled for the ladder, but the thing that used to be Tom moved faster than anything I'd ever seen. It grabbed the elderly man with its long black fingers. I had 3 silver bullets left, my grandmother's medicine pouch, and 6 lives depending on me. And somewhere in that thing was my friend Tom, if there was anything left of him to save. I fired another silver bullet, hitting the creature's arm. It shrieked, a sound like metal scraping on rock, and dropped the elderly man. The old man scrambled away, his wife helping him to the ladder. "Everyone, get down, now!" I yelled, keeping my gun aimed at the thing that used to be Tom. The family of 4 was already climbing down, but the elderly couple was still too close to the monster. Then I remembered Joseph's words from earlier. Skinwalkers hate the sacred herbs. My hands shaking, I reached for my grandmother's medicine pouch with my free hand. The creature that was Tom spoke, but now its voice was like many voices talking at once. "Frank, friend, why fight me? Join me instead. The power, the freedom." "You're not Tom," I said, backing up slowly. "You killed my friend." It laughed that horrible laugh again and started crawling towards me, on the walls, then the ceiling, moving like a giant spider. I threw my grandmother's medicine pouch at it, and the dried herbs burst out in a cloud. The effect was instant. The creature screamed and fell to the floor, its skin smoking where the herbs touched it. I used this chance to help the elderly couple reach the ladder. But as they started climbing down, the monster recovered. "Fine," it growled. "Then you'll watch them die like the others." It jumped, not at me, but straight for the ladder where the tourists were climbing down. I had 2 silver bullets left. Time seemed to slow down as I aimed my gun. If I missed, those people would die. If I hit the ladder, they'd fall. I took a deep breath, just like I'd learned in Korea. I could hear my grandmother's voice in my head. "Trust your heart, little warrior. It knows the truth." I pulled the trigger. The silver bullet hit the creature right between its glowing eyes, It let out a scream that shook the whole cliff dwelling, but it didn't die. Instead, it fell onto the ledge below, giving the tourists enough time to reach the ground safely. But now I was trapped up there, with just one bullet left, facing a monster that was getting angrier by the second. The thing that used to be Tom started to change again. Its body grew larger, darker, filling up the small space. Those red eyes multiplied until I was surrounded by them, all staring at me. "You can't save everyone, Frank," it hissed. "Look." Down below, I could see more shapes moving in the darkness. Those walking coyotes were back, closing in on the tourists. I heard screams and crying. I had to do something fast. That's when I remembered the last part of Joseph's instructions. The binding ritual requires a sacrifice freely given. I looked at my grandmother's medicine pouch, now empty except for one last thing, a small silver knife. The creature lunged at me, but I dodged, rolling towards the ancient fire pit in the corner. My hand found what I was looking for, old ashes, still sacred after all these years. I threw them in the monster's face, buying me just enough time. I started reciting the words Joseph taught me, the old native language feeling strange on my tongue. The creature froze, recognizing the ancient prayer. It tried to reach me, but the words seemed to hold it back. "You'll die if you finish that ritual," it screamed with Tom's voice, trying to trick me one last time. I knew what I had to do. I raised the silver knife and looked at my left arm. Sometimes, to save others, you have to be willing to lose a part of yourself. I gripped the silver knife tightly and did what had to be done. I cut deep into my left arm. The pain was horrible, but I kept saying the ancient words. My blood dripped onto the stone floor, forming a circle around the monster. The creature howled and tried to escape, but it couldn't cross the bloodline. The walking coyotes down below started howling too, and then they just disappeared into shadows. "No, no, no," the thing screamed. Its body started shrinking, twisting, trying to change into different shapes. A coyote, an eagle, even Tom one last time. But it was trapped. The ground started shaking. In the back of the cliff dwelling, an old wall cracked open, revealing a dark chamber that seemed to go on forever. The creature got pulled towards it like it was being sucked in by a giant vacuum. "This isn't over, Frank Harrison," it shrieked. "I'll wait. I'll come back." Then it was gone, sucked into the ancient chamber. The wall sealed itself shut like it had never been opened. Everything went quiet except for my heavy breathing and the distant sounds of the tourists below. I tied my ranger shirt around my bleeding arm and somehow made it down the ladder. The park police and ambulances were already there. Apparently, one of the tourists had called 911 from their car. Nobody believed what really happened, of course. The official report said it was a bear attack, and Tom was listed as missing in action. My arm... Well, they said I got hurt trying to save the tourists from the bear. But every full moon, I still check the old cliff dwellings. Sometimes I hear strange noises coming from deep within the walls. And sometimes, when the moon is red like it was that night, I see fresh claw marks on the sealed wall. The thing in the chamber is still there, waiting. And as long as I'm alive, I'll make sure it stays trapped. Because I know the truth, some ancient evils never really die, they just sleep. That was 12 years ago. My left arm never worked right again, but I don't regret what I did. I still work at Mesa Verde, keeping my watch. And every now and then, when tourists ask about the strange noises at night, I just smile and say it's the wind. But we both know better now, don't we? My name is Mary Blackwood, and this happened to me in the winter of 1977. I wish I could forget what I saw in the Boundary Waters that February, but some things stay with you forever, haunting your dreams and making you question everything you thought you knew about our world. I was a ranger at the time, stationed at the northern edge of Minnesota. Before that, I'd been an Olympic biathlete, skiing and shooting, But after what happened to my brother Tommy 3 years earlier in these same woods, I gave up competing. Instead, I took this job, hoping that maybe, just maybe, I'd find some answers about his disappearance. That winter was different from any I'd seen before, and I'd seen plenty of harsh ones. The cold wasn't just cold, it was angry. The thermometer outside my cabin kept dropping until it hit -60 DU4F, breaking all previous records. The sky looked wrong too. The northern lights, usually so beautiful in their greens and purples, had turned a deep, bloody red. I'd never seen anything like it, and neither had any of the old-timers. I remember sitting in my cabin that first night, when everything started, listening to the ancient pine trees creaking under the weight of ice and snow. The wind didn't howl like normal, it seemed to whisper, almost like it was trying to speak. My radio kept picking up static, with occasional bursts of what sounded like children laughing. But there weren't any children for miles around. I didn't know it then, but that was just the beginning. The next morning, I'd get a call about 7 missing ice fishermen that would change my life forever. Looking back now, I should have seen the signs. The half-eaten deer we found hanging in the trees, those strange footprints that led nowhere, and the way my dog Rex refused to stop whimpering whenever we looked out at the frozen lake. What happened over the next few days? Well, that's the story I need to tell you. But I have to warn you, this isn't a happy tale with a neat ending. Sometimes, the truth is harder to believe than any fiction, and sometimes, the monsters we dismiss as legends turn out to be all too real. Let me start from that morning when the call came in. It was around 6 a.m. when my radio crackled to life. The voice on the other end was shaking. It was Susan from dispatch, and I'd never heard her sound so worried. "Mary, we've got a problem. The Johnson family and their friends, 7 people total, they went ice fishing yesterday at North Lake. They haven't come back, and their families are freaking out. Their trucks are still at the parking lot, but no sign of them." My stomach dropped. In these temperatures, nobody survives a night outside without proper shelter. I grabbed my emergency pack, the one I always kept ready. Inside was everything I needed: first aid kit, extra warm clothes, flares, my hunting rifle, the one blessed by the local tribe's elder, a gift after I helped find his lost grandson, and enough supplies for 3 days. As I drove to North Lake, something felt off. The morning was too quiet. No birds, no wildlife sounds, nothing. Just the crunch of my truck's tires on the snow. The temperature reading on my dashboard kept dropping. -45 DU4F, -50 DU4F, -55 DU4F. This wasn't normal, even for Minnesota winters. I parked next to the 3 abandoned trucks at the lake's edge. Fresh snow had fallen overnight, but I could still make out old footprints leading onto the ice. I followed them, my boots crunching in the snow. The tracks led to an ice fishing spot about half a mile out, just holes in the ice now, frozen over again. That's when I saw the first strange thing. Next to one of the holes was a thermos, still standing upright, with coffee frozen solid inside. Around it, the fishing gear was scattered like someone had left in a hurry. But the weird part? Their tracks after that went in different directions, like they'd all suddenly decided to split up. Nobody who knows anything about winter survival would do that. I keyed my radio. "Dispatch, this is Blackwood. We're going to need a search team. Something's not right here." As I waited for backup, I heard it. A sound that made my blood run cold. It was Tommy's voice, my missing brother, calling from somewhere across the lake. "Mary, help me. I'm over here." But that was impossible. Tommy had been gone for 3 years. I gripped my rifle tighter, my hands shaking. The voice called again, but this time, it didn't sound quite human. I stood frozen, my heart pounding. That voice, it sounded exactly like Tommy, but something was wrong. It seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at the same time. "Hello?" I called out, my voice echoing across the frozen lake. "Is anyone there?" The wind picked up suddenly, and the snow started falling harder. Within minutes, I could barely see 20 feet ahead of me. The temperature dropped even more, if that was possible, and my eyelashes started freezing together. That's when my radio crackled again. "Mary?" It was Joe, one of our senior rangers. "We're heading your way with a team of 5. Should be there in 20 minutes. I was about to respond when I saw something that made me forget how to breathe. About 50 yards away, through the swirling snow, stood a dark figure. It was tall, too tall to be human, and incredibly thin. For a second, our eyes met. Its eyes glowed like burning coals in the whiteness. Then it was gone. I blinked hard, telling myself it was just the snow playing tricks on my eyes. But deep down, I knew what I'd seen. The stories the local tribes had told us about the Wendigo, the winter spirit that brings hunger and death, didn't seem so crazy anymore. My radio came to life again, but this time with a horrible screaming sound. It wasn't human or animal. It was something in between. I switched it off quickly, my hand shaking. Then I heard something moving on the ice beneath my feet. A slow, deliberate tapping, like something was trying to break through from below. I moved back carefully, remembering all those stories about things that lived in the deepest parts of these lakes. The search team arrived just then. Joe, Mike, Sarah, Pete, and David. They all looked worried, and I could tell they'd heard those screams on their radios too. "Mary," Joe said, his breath forming clouds in the freezing air, "we found something you need to see, back in the woods." He didn't finish his sentence, because right then, we all heard it. Children laughing, the sound echoing across the ice. But there was something wrong with the laughter. It was too high-pitched, too, hungry. And it was getting closer. Joe led us back toward the tree line, our flashlight beams cutting through the growing darkness. None of us spoke. We were all listening for that awful laughter, but it had stopped. The only sound was the crunch of our boots in the snow and our heavy breathing. "There." Joe pointed to a large pine tree. "Look up." I lifted my flashlight, and my stomach turned. Hanging from the branches, at least 30 feet up, was half a deer. Not like a normal kill from a mountain lion or wolf. This was different. The deer looked partially eaten, but the bite marks were huge, and no normal animal could lift a deer that high. "That's not the worst part," Sarah whispered, her voice shaking. "Look at the trunk." I moved my light to the tree trunk. There were claw marks, deep gouges in the bark that went all the way up. They were fresh, the wood still oozing sap despite the freezing temperature. I reached out and touched one of the marks. Each groove was wider than my hand. "We need to find those people fast," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "Let's split into pairs. Pete and David, you head east. Sarah and Joe go west. Mike, you're with me. Stay in radio contact every 5 minutes." As we separated, the snow started falling again. That's when we heard Tommy's voice once more, but this time everyone heard it. "Mary, everyone, over here, I found them." Mike grabbed my arm. "Mary, wasn't your brother?" "Yes, I cut him off. He disappeared 3 years ago." Through the radio, I heard Pete's panicked voice. "Guys, we found one of the missing fishermen. He's alive, but something's wrong. He keeps saying he's so hungry. He tried to bite David." Then Sarah's voice. "The tracks we're following, they're not human anymore. They're getting bigger, longer." Suddenly, all our radios exploded with static, and through it came a sound that made my skin crawl. It was like 1,000 voices screaming in hunger, all at once. In the distance, something very, very tall moved between the trees. Mike and I started running toward Pete and David's location, but the snow was getting worse. The wind howled around us, and the temperature kept dropping. Our flashlight beams barely cut through the blizzard now. "Help! Someone help!" David's voice came through the radio. We could hear him panting. "The fisherman, he's chasing us! His face! Oh God, his face is changing!" Then we heard Pete screaming. Mike and I ran faster, our boots crunching in the deep snow. That's when we saw it, a dark shape ahead, much taller than the trees. It moved like nothing I'd ever seen before, jerky and quick, like a spider. The shape disappeared into the swirling snow, but I could hear it moving, breaking branches as it went. We found David hiding behind a fallen tree. He was shaking, his face pale as the snow around us. "Pete. It took Pete," he whispered. And the fisherman we found, his arms and legs got longer, and his mouth. David couldn't finish. Through the radio, we heard Sarah crying. "Joe's gone. Something grabbed him right in front of me. It was so fast. I can see blood in the snow." My hands were shaking as I reached for my radio. "Sarah, stay where you are. We're coming to get you." But before we could move, we heard that awful children's laughter again. It was closer now, coming from all around us. The snow swirled harder, and in the whiteness, I saw something that made my heart stop. It was Tommy. He stood there, just 20 feet away, but something was terribly wrong. His skin was stretched too tight over his bones, and his fingers were now long, sharp claws. When he smiled at me, his mouth was full of needle-like teeth. "I've been so hungry, Mary," he said, but his voice wasn't human anymore. "We're all so hungry." Behind him, more shapes emerged from the blizzard. They were tall, skeletal things that used to be human. I recognized the missing fishermen's clothes hanging in tatters from their transformed bodies. Mike raised his gun with trembling hands. "Mary," he whispered, "what do we do?" I gripped my blessed rifle tighter, tears freezing on my cheeks. The thing that used to be my brother took a step closer. There's no time to think. I raised my blessed rifle and shouted, "Run! Back to the lake!" We turned and ran, our boots kicking up snow. Behind us, I heard that awful sound, like tree branches snapping mixed with animal screams. They were chasing us. "The ice!" I yelled to Mike and David. "They're afraid of running water. Maybe the lake will slow them down." We reached the lake's edge, sliding onto the ice. My flashlight beam caught movement everywhere, dark shapes circling us in the blizzard. The thing that used to be Tommy was getting closer, moving in that terrible spider-like way. Suddenly, Mike screamed. One of the transformed fishermen had grabbed his leg. Before David or I could help, it dragged him into the darkness. His screams. I'll never forget those screams. "Mary," Tommy's twisted voice called out. "Don't you want to join us? I've missed you, sister." That's when I remembered something the tribal elder had told me when he blessed my rifle. Fire, they fear the sacred fire. With shaking hands, I pulled out the emergency flares from my pack. David understood immediately and did the same. We lit them, and the red light pushed back the darkness. The creatures hissed and backed away from the light. For the first time, I could see them clearly. Their bodies were stretched and twisted, skin pulled tight over impossible angles. Their eyes glowed with a horrible, hungry light. "David," I whispered, "when I say run, head straight for the ranger station. Don't stop, don't look back. What about you? I have to end this. I have to help Tommy." The thing that was my brother stepped into the flare light. "Mary, I'm so hungry." His face was changing as he spoke, becoming something terrible. I raised my rifle, tears freezing on my face. "I'm sorry, Tommy. I'm so sorry." I pulled the trigger. The blessed bullet hit Tommy square in the chest. He let out a scream that shook the trees. Not human, not animal, but something in between. Blue fire spread from where the bullet hit him, like ice cracking. "Now, David, run!" I screamed, lighting another flare and throwing it between us and the creatures. As David ran, I faced my brother. The other creatures were backing away, making horrible shrieking sounds. Tommy's body was burning with that strange blue fire, but he was still coming toward me. "Mary, please help me." For a moment, I heard my real brother's voice filled with pain. That's when I noticed something strange. The ice below us was cracking, not from the cold, but from something moving underneath. The tapping sound from earlier was back, louder now, much louder. I took a step back, remembering all the stories about things that lived in the deep parts of these lakes. The ice groaned. Tommy reached for me with his twisted, burning hands. "Join us, sister. Stay with me." I fired again, and again. Each blessed bullet spread more blue fire. Tommy's monster form was burning away, but underneath was something worse. Something ancient and hungry that had been wearing my brother's shape. The ice cracked with a sound like thunder. Water began seeping up through the cracks. The other creatures were retreating now, their awful screams fading into the blizzard. "I'm sorry, Tommy," I whispered, and fired one last time. The thing that had been my brother exploded in blue flames. As it burned, I saw hundreds of faces in the fire, all its victims over the years, finally being set free. The ice beneath my feet started to break apart. I turned and ran, the sound of cracking ice following me. Behind me, I heard a massive splash and something enormous breaking through the ice. I ran as fast as I could, jumping from one ice chunk to another. The cracking sound was getting closer. My lungs burned from the freezing air, but I couldn't stop. I looked back once, just once. What I saw rising from the broken ice made my heart nearly stop. It was bigger than anything I'd ever seen. Its head alone was the size of a car, with rows of teeth that glowed like ice crystals. This was the real thing, the ancient Wendigo that had been hiding in the lake all these years. "You cannot escape." It spoke in 1,000 voices at once. The hunger must spread. My legs were getting heavy, and my fingers were numb around my rifle. The shore seemed so far away. Behind me, the creature's massive claws crashed through the ice, getting closer with each step. That's when I remembered my last flare. With frozen fingers, I pulled it out and lit it. The red light reflected off the ice like blood. The creature hissed, a sound like winter wind through dead trees. I had one blessed bullet left, one chance. The creature reared up, its shadow blocking out the sky. In that moment, I saw all its victims in its eyes. Tommy, the fisherman, and countless others going back decades. I raised my rifle one last time. The creature lunged. I fired straight into its open mouth. The blue fire exploded outward like a star bursting. The creature's scream shook snow from the trees, but as it burned, I felt something inside me change. A cold hunger started growing in my stomach. I made it to shore just as the sun started rising. The lake was quiet now, the ice already starting to freeze over the huge hole. David had made it to the ranger station and called for help. But I knew I couldn't stay. The hunger was getting stronger. My fingers were getting longer, and when I looked in my truck's mirror, my eyes had started to glow. I left my badge and rifle at the ranger station with a note. They found my truck at the Canadian border 3 days later, covered in snow. No one has seen me since. The official report said it was a tragic accident, that the extreme cold and blizzard caused people to get confused and lost. They found some bodies when the ice melted in spring, but not all of them. They never found Tommy's remains or the others who went missing that night. David tried to tell them what really happened, but who would believe such a story? They said the cold and fear made him imagine things. He quit his job soon after and moved to Florida. Can't blame him. Sometimes, on the coldest winter nights, people in the Boundary Waters still hear children laughing in the blizzard. Fishermen tell stories about seeing something huge moving under the ice. And every few years, people go missing when the temperature drops too low. As for me, the hunger never went away. It got worse. I had to go north, far north, where no one lives. Up here in the endless snow, I fight it every day. But I can feel myself changing. My fingers are longer now, and I can't stand to look at my reflection. I'm writing this as a warning. If you're ever in the northern woods in winter, and you hear a familiar voice calling your name through the snow, run. Run as fast as you can. And whatever you do, don't look back. Because sometimes the legends are real. Sometimes the monsters win. And sometimes they wear the faces of the people we love. This is how my story ends. When the temperature drops to -60 dU 4F, And the northern lights turn blood red, remember? That thing under the ice is still hungry, and it's always looking for more. My name is Diana Wells, and this happened to me in 1992, a year I'll never forget. I was a ranger at Monongahela National Forest in West Virginia, but before that, I worked as an FBI behavioral analyst. Most people don't know this, but I've always been fascinated by strange creatures, the kind that most people think don't exist. I guess that's why I ended up where I did. I remember my first day at the forest like it was yesterday. The trees were ancient, some over 500 years old, reaching up to the sky like giant guardians. Everything seemed normal at first, just the usual forest sounds and the smell of pine needles in the air. But then my compass started spinning like crazy, and my radio kept crackling with static. I thought it was just faulty equipment, but boy, was I wrong. You see, 3 years before this, I lost my entire family in this very forest. They went camping and never came back. The official report said it was a bear attack, but I never believed that. Something in my gut told me there was more to the story. That's why I took this job, to find answers. During my first week, 3 weird things happened that should have made me run away. First, my flashlight died even though I just put in new batteries. Then, I found a perfect circle of stones that hadn't been there the day before. And I mean perfect, like someone had used a giant compass to draw it. But the strangest thing? The birds. They were flying in patterns I'd never seen before, making shapes in the sky that defied nature. Little did I know, these were just the first signs of something much darker, something that would change my life forever. And trust me, what I'm about to tell you. Well, let's just say it's not your typical forest ranger story. It all started when little Tommy Parker went missing. He was just 8 years old, wearing a red baseball cap and carrying his favorite dinosaur backpack. His parents said he was right behind them on the hiking trail, but when they turned around, he was gone, just vanished like a puff of smoke. That same week, I found something that made my skin crawl. Behind Old Miller's farm, 5 cows lay dead in a strange star pattern. Their bodies were cut up in ways that no animal could do. What made it even stranger was that there were no footprints around them, not even their own hoof prints. It was as if they'd fallen from the sky. But the thing that really shook me happened on a quiet Tuesday morning. I was doing my usual rounds when I heard a dripping sound. At first, I thought it was just morning dew, but when I looked up, I saw something impossible. The old oak tree was bleeding, not sap, but real red blood. I touched it, and it was warm. I've been in forests all my life, but I'd never seen anything like this. That's when my equipment started acting weird. My phone died, even though it was fully charged. My radio only played static, and sometimes I could swear I heard whispers coming through it. Not words exactly, but sounds that almost made sense, like someone trying to talk underwater. The worst part? My special ability started kicking in, the one I'd kept secret my whole life. Since I was little, I could always sense when something wasn't right, like a cold spot in my chest. And now, that feeling was getting stronger every day. It was like the forest itself was trying to warn me. I knew I should have reported all this to headquarters, but something told me they wouldn't believe me. Besides, I had a feeling this was somehow connected to what happened to my family 3 years ago. I needed to find out the truth, no matter what. Looking back now, I wish I'd listened to that little voice telling me to run. But I didn't know then what I know now, that some mysteries are better left unsolved, and some truths are too terrible to face. That night, something happened that I'll never forget. I was patrolling near the old hiking trails when I saw it for the first time. At first, I thought it was just a really big bird in the moonlight. But birds don't stand 7 feet tall, and they definitely don't have glowing red eyes. The creature looked like something between a moth and a man. Its wings were huge, maybe 15 feet across, and dark as the night sky. But what really got me were those eyes. They seemed to look right through me, like they could read my thoughts. My whole body went cold, and I couldn't move. It felt like someone had turned off all the sound in the forest. Then the strangest thing happened. In my head, I started seeing pictures, flashes of things I'd never seen before. A huge fire in the forest, people running, trees falling. It was like watching a movie, but inside my mind. I knew right then that this creature wasn't just showing me random images. It was showing me what was going to happen. When I finally could move again, I pulled out my phone to take a picture, but it just melted in my hands. Not from heat, it just sort of dissolved. That's when I noticed all the animals around me were acting weird. Squirrels, deer, and even some birds had formed a circle around me, all standing perfectly still, like they were in a trance. The creature, I started calling it the Mothman in my head, just watched. Then it lifted one long, thin arm and pointed deeper into the forest. All the animals turned their heads in that direction at the exact same time, like they were puppets on strings. I knew it wanted me to follow, but I also knew that might be the last thing I ever did. Just then, my radio crackled to life. Through the static, I heard children laughing. But it wasn't happy laughter. It was the kind that makes your blood run cold. I recognized one of those laughs. It sounded just like Tommy Parker, the missing boy. I had to make a choice right then and there. Follow this thing into the dark forest or run back to safety. But really, there was no choice at all. Those kids needed help, and I was the only one who knew what was really going on. So I took a deep breath, checked my special silver bullets, don't ask where I got those, and started walking in the direction the Mothman had pointed. Sometimes the scariest path is the one you have to take. The deeper I walked into the forest, the stranger things got. The trees seemed to whisper, and the ground felt like it was moving under my feet. After about an hour of walking, I found something that made my heart stop, an old clearing I'd never seen before, even though I knew every inch of this forest. In the middle of the clearing was a huge circle of black stones, each one taller than me. But what really scared me was what I found inside the circle. There were nests, not normal bird nests, but huge ones made of twisted metal and branches. And in these nests were eggs. They were bigger than basketballs and seemed to pulse with a faint blue light. Suddenly, my head started spinning, and everything around me changed. 1 minute it was night, then day, then night again. It was like someone was flipping through time like pages in a book. I saw the same clearing in different times, Native Americans performing rituals, colonial settlers running in fear, and something else. Something that looked like my family on their last camping trip. That's when I realized this place was some kind of breeding ground, and it had been here for hundreds of years. The Mothman wasn't just one creature. There had been many of them, generation after generation, and somehow they were connected to every bad thing that had ever happened in this forest. My whole body felt different too. My skin tingled like it was full of electricity, and I could suddenly see in the dark as clear as day. Whatever this place was, it was changing me. I could feel it in my bones, in my blood. It was like the forest was becoming part of me, or maybe I was becoming part of it. Then I heard Tommy's laugh again, closer this time. But it wasn't coming from my radio. It was coming from inside one of the nests. I took out my flashlight and pointed it toward the sound. What I saw in that nest made me realize this was much bigger and much worse than I'd imagined. I knew right then that I had to make a choice that would change everything. But before I could move, I heard those giant wings behind me, and that cold feeling in my chest turned to ice. The Mothman had returned, and this time, I knew it wasn't going to let me leave. I turned around slowly, and there it was. Not just one Mothman, but 3 of them. They surrounded me, their wings blocking out what little moonlight was left. In the nest behind me, I could hear Tommy whimpering. He wasn't alone. There were other children too, all of them trapped in some kind of trance. The largest Mothman stepped forward, and suddenly my mind was flooded with visions. I saw a massive forest fire that would destroy everything, but it wasn't just any fire. It was meant to happen, a cleansing that these creatures had planned. The children weren't just prisoners. They were meant to be witnesses to something terrible. Then I understood the truth about my family. They hadn't been killed, they'd been chosen. Just like these kids. Just like me. The Mothman had been selecting people for generations, changing them, making them different. I looked at my hands and saw my skin was starting to shimmer in the darkness, just like theirs. "Let them go," I said, surprised that my voice didn't shake. "Take me instead." The creatures tilted their heads, all at the same time. In my mind, I heard a voice, ancient and powerful. "You are already ours, Diana Wells. You have been since the day your family joined us. But you have a choice." They showed me two possible futures. In one, I could save the children, but the forest would die. In the other, the children would become like me, like them, and the forest would live on, growing stronger, darker, more powerful. I thought about Tommy, about all the other kids. I thought about my family. Were they still alive somewhere, changed into something else? Part of me wanted to know, wanted to become whatever these creatures were offering. But then I remembered something my dad used to say. Sometimes the right choice is the hardest one. I reached for my gun with the silver bullets. The Mothmen didn't move. They knew what I was going to do before I did. Maybe they'd always known. As I raised the gun, I felt tears running down my face. I wasn't just choosing to save the children. I was choosing to end something that had existed for centuries. "I'm sorry," I whispered, and pulled the trigger. The silver bullets didn't kill the Mothmen. Nothing that simple could. But they did something worse. They broke the ancient magic that held this place together. The ground started shaking, and those strange eggs began to crack and turn black. The Mothmen screamed, not with their mouths, but in my mind, and the sound was like 1,000 years of anger all at once. I ran to the nests and started pulling out the children. Tommy was first. He was cold but breathing. One by one, I got them all out. 6 kids in total. The forest around us was changing. Trees were dying right before my eyes, their leaves turning to ash. The ground cracked open, showing deep holes that glowed with an eerie red light. The largest Mothman spoke in my mind one last time. "You have chosen, Diana Wells, but choices have consequences. Your bloodline will carry our mark forever. You will never escape what you could have become." Then it happened, a blast of energy that knocked me to my feet. When I looked up, the Mothmen were gone, but they'd left their curse behind. The whole clearing was dead, just black earth and twisted trees. The stone circle had crumbled to dust, but the children were safe, all of them starting to wake up. I got them out of the forest just as the sun was rising. When I looked in a mirror later that day, I saw what the curse had done to me. My eyes had flecks of red in them now, and sometimes, when I'm scared or angry, they glow just like theirs did. I can still sense things others can't, and sometimes I dream of flying over ancient forests. The Monongahela National Forest was never the same after that night. That whole section became known as the Dead Zone. Nothing grows there anymore. The official story says it was toxic waste or some kind of natural disaster, but the locals know better. They say on full moon nights, you can still hear wing beats in the sky. As for me, I still work as a ranger, but in a different forest now. I keep moving every few years when people start noticing that I don't age quite like I should. The curse of the Mothmen lives in my blood, and sometimes I wonder if I made the right choice that night. But then I think about Tommy and the other kids, all grown up now with families of their own, and I know I did. Even if it means I'll never be completely human again, some prices are worth paying. Just remember, if you're ever in the woods at night and your compass starts spinning, or you hear children laughing through static, or see something big flying against the moon, run. Run as fast as you can, because not everyone who faces the Mothmen gets to make a choice like I did. That's not quite the end of my story, though. There's something else I need to tell you about what happened after that night. Something I've never told anyone else. About a month after the incident, I started noticing strange things happening around me. Whenever I got really upset or scared, electronics would go crazy, light bulbs would burst, phones would die, and TVs would turn to static, just like what used to happen in the forest. One night, I woke up floating 3 feet above my bed. That's when I realized the Mothmen's curse wasn't just about my eyes or not aging. They'd given me some of their powers too. I could sense when bad things were about to happen, just like they could. Sometimes I'd dream about disasters days before they occurred. I tried to use these abilities to help people. When I sensed a big forest fire coming, I'd make sure the area was evacuated. When I knew a flood was about to hit, I'd warn the local rangers. Nobody knew how I knew these things. They just called me Lucky Diana and left it at that. But there's a dark side to this gift. Every year on the anniversary of that night, I have to go back to the dead zone. Something pulls me there, like a magnet. And each time I return, I see them, not the Mothmen themselves, but their shadows, their echoes. They're still watching, still waiting. The scariest part? Last time I went back, I found a new stone circle starting to form. Just a few small rocks arranged in a perfect ring. And inside that ring was a single black feather, bigger than any bird should be. I don't know if they're trying to come back, or if something worse is coming. But I do know one thing. As long as I'm alive, I'll keep watching, keep protecting people from what's out there in the dark. It's my responsibility now. So if you're ever hiking in a national forest, and you meet a ranger with strange eyes who tells you to take a different trail, listen to her. She might just be saving your life. Because some stories don't really end. They just turn into warnings.